My name is Brian, and here are a few things that you should know about me. I'm a seminarian. I teach in the English department at Butler University, and I'm a pretty steady person, not dramatic, not highly reactive. I've only given a few sermons, but I've been listening to sermons for half a century, and I don't think I'm going to be the kind of preacher who always holds the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, like Karl Barth famously said. Not every week, at least. I don't want us to be prisoners of the moment, constantly reacting to every fresh outrage. And yet, there are moments in history that cannot be ignored. Moments when faithful people have to face hard things together. When I look at Minnesota, I believe we are in such a moment. In recent weeks, 2 people have been shot and killed by ICE, including a mother and an ICU nurse whose death has been ruled a homicide by the county medical examiner. These deaths are not isolated incidents. They are part of a broader pattern: racial profiling, arrests carried out at hospitals, the use of tear gas against peaceful protesters. When I read the news, when I see the videos, I don't feel steady. I feel deeply unsettled, desperate, afraid, impotent. I think, what am I supposed to do? I know I'm not the only one sitting with these questions. I have a group of friends I've known for almost 40 years. The other day we were texting about Minnesota, and one friend wrote, "What are we going to do about it?" And the thread went quiet for a long time. It's a hard question. At Butler, I teach a lot of first-year seminar, a class about writing and reading and research. A couple weeks ago, one of my students sent me a reflection, not even an assignment, just something that was on her heart. Like many of us, she was looking at Minnesota with rage and despair. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. I wrote back that I shared her anger, and I wished I had a good answer. At the same time, I commended her for asking a tough question and urged her to live with that question, to listen to it. Even as I wrote that response, I thought, that is such a professor thing to say. It felt inadequate, unsatisfying. So the question continues to dangle before us this morning. What are we supposed to do? Isaiah can help us hear an answer. To understand our reading from Isaiah, you have to know a little about the fall of Israel. Let me sketch this out quickly. We'll start in the Golden Era, when the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom were united under King David and then under his son Solomon. Jerusalem was a walled city, and God lived in the temple at its heart. How could they ever fall? Except they did. Babylon came in like a wave, destroyed the temple, captured the best and brightest, and took them away to be servants in Babylon. Can you imagine how that must have felt? Can you imagine the disbelief you might have felt if you were an Israelite? Did God get beaten? Or did God abandon us? Which possibility is worse? The exile went on and on, decade after decade. Some Israelites assimilated and were absorbed into Babylonian society, but not all. A remnant stayed together, telling the stories, practicing the rituals that maintained their identity. And the whole time, they kept their eyes toward Jerusalem, telling themselves someday someday we will return. Someday we will rebuild. And it will be even better than before. Their hope was fueled by prophets like Isaiah, who spun visions of a triumphant return to glory in Israel, a second Exodus. And eventually, it happened. Kind of. Babylon was sacked by the Persians, and the Israelites were allowed to return to Jerusalem. Only, they weren't exactly free. Now they were under Persian rule. And once they got to Jerusalem, rebuilding turned out to be harder and slower and a lot less glorious than the prophets had led them to believe. If you were a member of that faithful remnant, you might be tempted to say, look, I've done my part. I've kept the faith. I'm doing the work. Why isn't God delivering on God's promises? God, what more do you want from us? What are we supposed to do? This is when Isaiah enters the chat. You've got it all wrong, he says. You think you're serving God, but really, you're serving your own interests. You want to know what to do? This is what God wants you to do. Loose the bonds of injustice. Undo the straps of the yoke. Free the oppressed and break every yoke. Let's pause here before we get to Isaiah's second set of commands. Isn't it interesting that a yoke comes up twice? At first, Isaiah says to undo the straps of the yoke. And then a couple verses later, he doubles back to the yoke. Like, you know what? We better break that thing in case somebody's tempted to use it again. Then he goes on to his second set of instructions. Share your bread with the hungry. Bring the homeless into your house. Cover the naked. The first set of instructions can be summarized as liberate, liberate, liberate. And the second set is share, share, share. Put it all together, and his message can be heard as, you want to please God? Help each other. Especially the vulnerable, especially the marginalized. Liberate and share, justice and mercy, these two belong together, and I don't think Isaiah's order is an accident. First liberate, then share. Step 1, break the yoke. Step 2, come to their aid. Or maybe there's another way to read that pairing. Maybe liberate and share are linked by an unspoken question. Liberate. How? By sharing. If you read it that way, violence is not the force that breaks the yoke. Mercy is the force that breaks the yoke. How's that for God's story in 8 words? Mercy is the force that breaks the yoke. By the way, can you picture a yoke? It's a wooden halter placed on a draft animal's neck, harnessing them to a plow or a cart. As a symbol, it implies servitude, oppression, dehumanization. When Isaiah talks about yokes, I tend to picture something imposed from the outside. Chains, batons, guns. And those yokes are real. Isaiah is not naive about power or imperial violence. But there's another yoke that Isaiah is talking about here. An internal yoke. The yoke of avoidance. The yoke that says, I don't want to look at that mess. I came in here to escape that mess out there and to feel comforted by ritual. If you're squirming right now, that might be the yoke on your neck. I know that yoke. I've worn that yoke my whole life. What looks like steadiness can sometimes be avoidance. Isaiah is here to tell us that avoidance of justice is a yoke. If you don't break it, oppression keeps doing its work unbothered by your worship. This is why Isaiah is so sharp with his audience. His problem is not that they're too religious exactly, it's that their religion has become a way of looking away from their neighbors. God does not want religiosity detached from justice. Religiosity detached from helping your neighbor. Religiosity that leaves the world unchallenged and unchanged. Break that yoke. Yes, there are other yokes. The yoke of fear that drives people to violence. The yoke of domination that leads us to treat entire categories of people as threats instead of neighbors. But Isaiah starts here, with people like us, faithful people, people who show up to worship, people who are trying to build up their community, people who sincerely want to know what to do. Break the yoke of avoidance, Isaiah says, because until that yoke is broken, nothing else will be. What does it look like when that yoke is broken? I've been paying attention to what some faithful people in Minnesota are doing, not online, not in speeches, but quietly on the ground. I'll share a couple of stories as witnesses to us. In the middle of winter, churches have formed a network to deliver food to families who are afraid to leave their homes. They are also raising money to help cover rent. It's the kind of boots on the ground mercy that Isaiah would immediately recognize. One evangelical pastor has been driving 2 Hispanic members of his small church to work every day so they won't be alone. He's also been driving his daughter's friend to school after ICE agents showed up at her bus stop. I never expected something like this to happen in the United States, he said. There's a calling on Christians right now to ask, what does it mean to love the sojourner? For that pastor, the call is to stand in solidarity with the vulnerable, practicing the ministry of accompaniment. This brings me back to Isaiah. The prophet tells us that if we can break these yokes, if we can liberate ourselves and each other, if we can share and help and feed and shelter one another, then your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, here I am. When we stand in solidarity with the vulnerable, we find God already there. When we accompany a suffering neighbor, we find God walking with us. And when we cry for help from that place, we can trust that God will answer, here I am.